One of the most important objectives of today's lab is to be able to define ergometry and then to calculate power output and to calculate work. So the first thing you have to remember for today's lab is what ergometry is. Ergometry is the measure of work. Measure work. So in order to measure work, we have to define what it is. And the easiest way to define work is with a little equation. Work is equal to a force times the distance that you move an object. So if something is not moving, you cannot do work. That's important. When we try to figure out what pieces of equipment in a gym are an ergometer and which are not, the ones where you can actually create movement over a distance are ergometers. So for example, a Monarch bicycle. You can turn the wheel, and every time the wheel turns, it's 6 meters. So therefore you're accomplishing work in moving a distance. Climbing a staircase would be ergometry because you are moving upwards. Running on a treadmill is not ergometry because you are not actually moving, you're stationary. Running on a track, on the other hand, now you're doing work again. So that's the first important definition. What makes up work is a force measured in newtons, so these are the units, times the distance in meters, okay, in which you travel. In other words, a Newton meter. And you can also call this a joule as its own unit. And if you have thousands of joules, you get what's called a kilojoule. And that's important because the numbers can get rather large. So first of all, let's look at a simple example here. If you want to calculate work, and you apply a force, say 10 newtons, times the distance, so you're going upward and you're pressing yourself up of 2 meters, then your work would be 20 Newton meters, or, okay, you could say 20 joules, or if 1,000 joules is 1 kilojoule, this would be 0.020 kilojoules. Now I have to look at one more example that's a little bit more complicated on a bike. So on a bike, as I mentioned before, work is measured by how many times you turn the wheel. So on a Monarch bike, okay, distance depends on turning the wheel, which has a 6-meter diameter. So 6 meters per revolution times the number of revolutions in a minute, sometimes called RPM. So here I'm going to write it as revs per minute. So let's say you're pedaling at 50 revolutions per minute. And lastly, you have to multiply that by how many minutes of work you're doing. So in this case, let's say we go for 1 minute interval. Keeps the math simple. So if we're pedaling for 1 minute at 50 revolutions per minute, and we know that the wheel is 6 meters in size, well, we've canceled all of our units. So revolutions are on the bottom here, they're on the top here, they cancel out. Minutes are on the bottom here, they're on the top here, they cancel out. So we're left with 60 times 6 times 50 times 1. Okay? 6 times 50 is equal to 300. And times 1 is still equal to 300, and all that's left is meters. So now we can go back to the bike and we can try to figure out how much force was applied. Well, when you want to figure out force on a bike, the neat thing about a Monarch is that you're measuring as though you were putting a weight and suspending it, and that weight was being pulled down by gravity and applying pressure to the wheel. This is different than, say, a commercial bike in a gym, where you don't necessarily calibrate or measure how much force you're applying to the wheel. You just put it to level 1 or level 2 or level 3 without knowing how much force those levels have. So on the Monarch, the force is always going to equal to the mass that you're putting on that bike. So let's say you have a 2 kilogram mass. And you have to multiply that by gravity. 9.81 meters per second squared, which is an acceleration. So in this case, you get 2 times 9.81, 2 times 10, so about 20 newtons. So lastly, if I want to calculate work, my work on that bike would be equal to 20 newtons, about 20 newtons, times the distance, so 300 meters, and we get an answer of 5,000. What are the last units? Either Newton meters or joules or kilojoules. So, Newton meters or joules, interchangeable, or this would be 5.000 kilojoules. And that is how we calculate work on a bike.